In Man of Steel #2, Brian Michael Bendis gives us a little bit more of his Superman story, but does he give us any answers? I am Stan, and this is Detail Comics. What's up, everybody? This is an iRate review, a show where I go over a comic book, its story, its art, give you my ideas, and let you know whether it's something you should go back to the comic book shop for or not. Make sure you subscribe to get more of these every single week. The book that I want to talk about right now is Man of Steel #2, which is from Brian Michael Bendis, and it's the second part of a 6-part miniseries that's going to be rolling out before he takes over Superman and Action Comics next month. So the real big keys to this is that Superman is going to be told in a very different way. So what we're looking for is different pieces that are going to kind of project where Brian Michael Bendis is going with the Man of Steel in the future. And the real big thing is what's happened with Lois Lane, Jonathan Kent, and how those things are impacting Superman in his daily life. But let's dive in and see what Brian Michael Bendis has in store. For a comic book called The Man of Steel, it's surprisingly not about Superman. And that's more about building the world around Superman. So this is an enhancement for what's going to be coming out in the Superman stories and the Action Comic stories from Brian Michael Bendis. And we open up again with Krypton, this time exploding in the vacuum of space. We also find ourselves with two of the members of this galactic council, this universal council, arguing over exactly what's going on. It looks like this kind of ice-shaped being, Lord Gandello, is having this conflict with Api Ali Apsa, the person that is the representative of the Guardians, or the representative of the Green Lanterns, asking the questions that we all know. Where was the Green Lantern of that sector? The idea, though, is to create this enhancement. While we all really recognize that there are some suspect moments inside Krypton's history, the real emphasis that Brian Michael Bendis wants to put on this moment is the fact that Rogol Zaar, this person that has dedicated himself and bathed in the blood of millions, is no longer loyal to this council and acting independently, which is one of the worst possible things. And that is leaving them both in a very worried state of mind, understanding that this is something that they didn't see. And Apa Ali Apsa makes his way back over to the planet where Rogol Zaar was training, driving his sword into the heart of this beast, trying to find this person, this champion for this council that possibly just killed an entire species, an entire race of people, only to find nothing. And that's when we bounce back to the Earth, where we're inside the Daily Planet, and we're reintroduced to Robinson Goode, the character that I pretty much forgot her name up until the point in time where she reintroduced herself to Trish, and she's digging inside the Daily Planet. Again, this is more of that world-building aspect. Since Action Comics is going to rely more on the Daily Planet, Brian Michael Bendis wants to set up the characters that you're going to be interacting with when you're in Clark Kent's life. And as she digs, she's just looking for any kind of dirt, any kind of leverage, any kind of insinuation as to what's going on with Clark Kent, and possibly, since we know what happened in DC Nation #0, a way to manipulate those things to her advantage. This, of course, is all interrupted by Perry White as he comes smashing out the door saying, "Don't ask me for Lois Lane's office," and it seems like there's people vying for her station. But it sets up a good moment between Perry and Jimmy Olsen. It doesn't really do much for the characters in the scene, but it does set up the idea that Clark Kent and Lois Lane, they live lives that are very different than anyone else, and they get a pass when it comes to the expectations that people have of them. And that's when Superman's seen over Coast City battling this giant robot. It almost looks action figure-esque, though. So as he flies through the city trying to take out this thing, trying to communicate with a person inside there, he knows, he understands, he realizes exactly who this is as he comes throwing this thing into the ground. It's electric shocks trying to reach out and barbecue him, and that's when it speaks. It's the same thing that Killer Moth and Firefly were trying to talk about. They've laid low, they've tried to keep their nose clean, but Superman isn't supposed to be where he is now. He's not supposed to be in Coast City. So there's something that's driving Superman to not necessarily be in the city that he loves, that he protects, Metropolis. And over this interaction that seems almost inconsequential to Superman, the robot wasn't really a threat. These small little kind of arachnid robots, they're nothing to Superman. And the real focus is on what happened to Toyman to create him, to turn him into the villain that he is. And it's probably got something to do with his mother, according to Brian Michael Bendis. But it's just a really light interaction. It shows that he's looking for the potential in other people, which is something that we already knew. And when Green Lantern arrives, it shows that he's not necessarily ready to deal with a lot of things. He skipped out on the last meeting of the Justice League, and he flies away from Hal without giving me any kind of reason. But that's when we flash back. We flash back to that scene that we got at the end of Man of Steel #1, where we see this giant flash inside the apartment of Lois, Jon, and Clark, and it's a ship that looks almost skull-like, almost Brainiac-like. We're not necessarily 100% on this, and there's no explanation given for it. Jason Fabek does this 2-page spread, and that's really all that we see of this scene that finished out Man of Steel #1, as Superman goes goes flying to the moon, smashing into it, creating a brand new crater in a fit of frustration. And then we're on the other side of the galaxy. We're in the Vega system, and all of a sudden a familiar word bubble shows up, and the conversation starts going over what the legacy is, what the history is of this kind of little pendant that seems to be sitting on the backside of the bar. A sign of someone's visit, a story that was told of Superman, a Kryptonian. And that's where we see the familiar eyes of what appears to be Rogol Zaar, as Superman is flying back from the moon, headed toward Metropolis, trying to think about how he should talk to Hal, and what it means that people put up with him being a little bit bratish sometimes because he's Superman, using his reputation to cover up these small interactions that aren't necessarily Superman-esque. But as he returns to Metropolis, he finds another building on fire. Somebody is trying to burn down Metropolis in front of his very eyes. As he rescues all these individuals, he's just trying to figure out exactly what's going on as he heads back to the planet. He's got the story now. He's got the arson. He's got the robot versus Superman inside Coast City. And Perry White already knows about this. The internet moves things too fast, and we see the evolution of Perry as a reporter. And it's all in this great scene done by Stephen Rood, where we see the face of Perry White over old newsprint of World War II, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the resignation of Richard Nixon, and then finally the attack on the Twin Towers. As Perry has evolved as a reporter, and the business has evolved, the technology has evolved, it shows the evolution and possibly even the death of standard newsprint and how news is delivered. And that's when he finally reveals that the Daily Planet is in trouble. The interactions, they need to be faster, they need to be quicker, they need to be more informed, but their public needs to know more, and they need to know it as quick as possible. And that's when Trish rolls in her kind of arts and leisure reporter style, saying that the thing that they need is they need the story of Lois Lane, the story of Lois Lane and Superman, to see exactly what's going on between these two, because Lois is pretty much almost famous, and they're distracted by this interaction that's happening in the TV in the background, and that only just leaves Superman to fly off and take what looks to be a Joker car and fly it off into the middle of nowhere, implying that Clark himself was offended by Trish's proposal for this, which he probably was, and just using it as an excuse to go out and save the day someplace else, bringing him away from everything that reminds him of Lois. And at that point in time, we get a little bit of a Lobo copycat, and Rogol Zaar headed towards what can only be Earth, Metropolis, and the Kryptonian he failed to assassinate in the destruction of planet Krypton. So that's where we're going to end Man of Steel #2, which really takes a turn that I wasn't necessarily expecting, because Superman is not the central character of the Man of Steel story. The real overriding theme is the development of the world around him and fleshing out various people that Brian Michael Bendis is going to use inside the world. And while it's not necessarily my favorite approach to how this story is going to go, it does provide a lot of substance and fleshes out the world around Superman. So if you're going to be focusing Superman on the tales of Superman, and if you're going to be focusing Action Comics on the world of Metropolis, the actions of the Daily Planet, and everything that occurs around there, this miniseries is the perfect place to introduce a lot of people to your writing style regarding Superman, who continues to feel less than Superman-esque. He continues to feel more human and more vulnerable and more flawed than what we see as a normal character. And then if you want to flesh out Metropolis, you get the idea that there are things that happen in Metropolis or don't happen in Metropolis that are unlike anywhere else in the world, simply because of the presence of Superman. And the art that's done by Doc Shanner, by Stephen Rood, the small little 2-page splash by Jason Fabic, they all serve the purpose of illustrating these different things. But I want to know what you guys think, so hit me up in the comments down below, and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.